I was surprised that he was so blunt. From the economic coercion we've seen from Chinese officials in the past, they don't talk about it, they just do it, like they did with Korea and other countries in recent times. They're into economic coercion, but they don't publicise it. This time, he's on the loudspeaker.
Yeah, you're right, Kieran, to observe that. And I think we are witnessing a change in Chinese international diplomatic behaviour. So recently, the French government had to call in its Chinese ambassador to rebuke him for statements on the embassy website to the effect that France was leaving its old people to die in old people's homes. The EU had done a report outlining systematic Chinese campaign of disinformation about the origins of the virus. The Chinese, of course, got wind of the report before it was published and then threatened very severe economic retaliation if the EU published that report. Now, then the report leaked out, but the report was semi-censored by the EU in the face of this economic retaliation. Now, the Australian government has been concerned about the sort of hectoring, insulting, intimidating way that the Chinese ambassador and his deputy so frequently attempt to interfere in Australian politics. It certainly has escalated in recent months. I don't think it's just for us, though. I think this is a new phase of aggressiveness in Chinese diplomacy, especially in Western nations. In Europe, the Chinese diplomats were very active in promoting this ludicrous conspiracy theory that the virus came to China with American soldiers. They didn't really do that in Australia. But these comments this week were very significant by the Chinese ambassador because they moved from admonishment to direct threat. And that's a very unbecoming and very strange thing for an ambassador to be doing.
Greg Sheridan, while we've got our government seemingly leading the charge right now, as the Trade Minister said to me earlier in the program, other like-minded nations quite simply don't have the bandwidth to respond and throw their support behind it because of the calamity that COVID has presented them in their various nations. But surely, as they come out of that immediate tragedy that they're dealing with, the pressure will be immense from the international community on China.
Well, a couple of things to observe there, Kieran. I thought Simon Birmingham gave a very good interview today because historically we've often seen trade ministers become the kind of the weak member of the government and fail to articulate the government's strategic message. But he quite properly reconfirmed that the government won't be moving away from its call for a full review. However, I think he slightly understated the strength of the government's case. Dominic Raab and Emmanuel Macron and others have said, yes, of course, there must be a full review. And of course, so has Donald Trump. Now, Australia's position is quite different from Trump's in the sense that we haven't withdrawn funding from the World Health Organization. The government, sensitive to China's concerns, is now calling it a review rather than an inquiry. But I don't think there's a government in the world where if you said to it, should there be a review of how this happened, would say no. I mean, this shows the absurdity of the ambassador's position. There was an inquiry after the Ebola outbreak, which killed far fewer people than this. How can you possibly argue the reverse proposition that an event which has so far killed well over 200,000 people, infected well over 3 million people, cost the global economy trillions of dollars, set up the potential for biblical-style famines according to the United Nations World Food Programme, and according to the Bank of England, will produce the worst recession not in a decade, but in centuries. How can you possibly take the view that there should not be a disinterested review into this? And I think a lot of governments have expressed their support for it. Australia perhaps has given a little more, formal thinking into exactly what form it should take, and there'll be an effort to make it, not sort of an offensive thing to China. It's meant to be a kind of a technocratic inquiry. What lessons can we learn? Not so much to apportion blame, but to learn lessons for the future. And the absolute hypersensitivity of the Chinese diplomatic service to any hint of criticism shows, I think, how far China has regressed and gone backwards under its current leadership. I mean, a few years ago, Chinese diplomats didn't respond with this Soviet propaganda style of discourse when, when some, element of imperfection was discovered in Chinese government policy.